we get uncomfortable when we have to explain why we believe the things that we believe. It's almost as uncomfortable as having to explain why we feel the things that we feel. The things that we feel oftentimes they're beyond description. And if we are able to describe them, it's because we've spent a lot of time in them. And we've also spent a lot of time with language. It's one of the reasons that we do this whole language arts thing. Most people are cowards, but brave people are cowards who go forward anyway. And there's a lot to be afraid of. There's a lot of stuff that's in our control to be afraid of. There's a lot of stuff that's out of our control to be afraid of. But the question becomes, do we go forward anyway? Do we willingly take on the tragedies of life? Because life is tragic, no matter how great and wonderful it is. And by the way, life is great. Life is wonderful. Life is spectacular and special. And the depth to which you understand that will reflect the depth to which you live. I promise you that. As soon as you recognize how incredibly precious your life is, now you're able to accept a wonderful life. Because everything can become like a child sees it, brand new and special for the first time. But then you also have to accept the tragedy of life. No matter how long it is, it's over too short. So you're going to die. What do you do with that? You overcome that by recognizing the precious gift that life is. There's another tragedy of life, which is suffering. How many of you have heard this before? Life is suffering. You don't get to choose not to suffer, but you can redeem yourself in that you can choose what you're going to suffer for. Because then the things that you suffer for are the things that you love. And this is how we express love. I mean, there's no greater love that a person has except that they would give their life for their friend. So those are the three tragedies of life: death, suffering, and guilt. And once you can come to grips with that, then you can address all of them. And then there's no need for conformity. At that point, it's just living. Goddamn right, it's living.
Once you bring something into question, that causes somebody to ask them about themselves, and that causes them to think about change. And change and thinking about change both hurt. And that causes people to just not want to do anything. That's why pain compliance is a thing, because you will always try to be the most comfortable part of yourself. And what is it that people say? Just rip off the Band-Aid. Because Band-Aids are just there to heal. Comfortability heals. But you're supposed to take it off eventually. Because hurting for something that you care about shows courage. And cowardice is not comfortability. Because cowardice shows that you have self-preservation for yourself. And comfortable people tend to be indifferent about their own situations.
So we get uncomfortable when people ask us to explain why we think the things that we think, why we believe the things that we believe, because the idea itself is comfortable. The explanation is not, because we're not sure why we find it comfortable. It's kind of what we grew up with, so it's what we've learned, and so it's not even a second nature. It actually replaces our first nature, probably, because it might replace the thing that we would have been originally. So, for example, if you're a particularly sensitive person and you show vulnerability and care for something that you care about, then you're chastised for being too emotional, showing your emotions. And so you learn not to. And so that now replaces your original nature. So you come up in a society that tells you don't show these things. I don't know though, it trips me out. I think it's a pretty scary thing. Imagine if you got someone who's especially in touch with feelings and they're vulnerable, but they're also really, really willing to fight. So they might be sitting there crying their eyes out and their hands come up and they want to fight with you. That person's frightening to me. Because that's a person who's willing to show who they really are, and then you have to fight him anyway. And there's no winning that fight. You fight that person and you win, you're a jerk for beating up the crying person. But then when you lose, not if, but when you lose, you also now just got your ass beat by the guy who's sitting there crying. You know? There's no winning that fight. Yeah, we get uncomfortable when we have to explain why we believe the things that we believe. It's almost as uncomfortable as having to explain why we feel the things that we feel. Because the things that we feel oftentimes they're beyond description. And if we are able to describe them, it's because we've spent a lot of time in them. And we've also spent a lot of time with language. It's one of the reasons that we do this whole language arts thing. I asked that question the first week that y'all were here, probably even on the first day, I asked, why are we here? Why do we study this thing? And we get the usual answers, because I need the credit when we graduate. And then we get the canned answers, because I want a better future. How does this help you have a better future? Does it? Yeah, absolutely. The more clearly that you can explain yourself, the more clearly you enter the world. If you never explain who you are, if you never explain why you feel the way that you feel, then that part of you never enters the world, if that makes sense. What enters the world is an avatar of you, the thing that you're supposed to be, the conforming version of you. So it isn't the real you, it's the you that society chewed up and spit out. And so, I just saw a really funny meme. I still have it on my phone. It's something to the effect of, the world keeps chewing me up and shitting me out, but I'm made of corn. Yeah, and if you understand that, you understand that. And then it's like a picture of a dude with like an arm in his mouth, so it's also a creepy picture. But the comment itself is really interesting. It means that no matter what you go through in life, you still come out as yourself. And that's a really, really hard thing to do, by the way, because it's so easy for us to get jaded. Someone treats us badly, and then we, cut our hair and then start behaving even worse than the person who treated us badly. I'm going to be like this now. I tried being nice, and now that didn't work, so now I'm going to be this. Well, it didn't work for what? What was your purpose? Did you think that being nice was going to get you the things that you wanted in life? Or did you think it was going to get you the things that you needed in life? If you're being mean to people, do you think that's going to get you the things that you need in life? Or is it only going to get you the things that you want in life? There's a reason that all these multi-billionaires, towards the end of their life, start giving all their money away. Because you don't get lots and lots and lots of money like that by being really, really nice to people. And this isn't a way of saying rich people are mean. Of course, I'm not saying that at all. And they're not any meaner than poor people. People are just people. No matter how much money you give them or where you put them, people are going to be people. People are going to be people. But there's a reason that that billionaires get to the end of their life and want to give away all their money. They want to redeem themselves in some way. There's a reason that my dad shows up on draft day, or towards the end of my life, because he wants to redeem himself in some way. This is a very natural human thing to go through. And so, like I said, it's a terrible thing when we conform to the world. And I don't mean, just, be contrary. Because the truth is that most of us are like everybody else. Most of us are very normal people. Most of us kind of fit into that bell curve. Most of us fit into that center thing right there. And that's fine. There's a danger when we live in a society that's always telling us, don't conform. Be yourself. Don't conform. Be yourself. What if you are a conforming person? You're being told not to be who you are, which is the exact opposite of the message that they think that they're sending us. Most people are like most people, Justin Bieber's popular for a reason. Although everyone will deny having them on his playlist, but there's a reason he's on playlist, because people like him. And then, even though we like him, we're afraid of admitting that we like his stuff. Why? Because we're afraid of conforming. There are people who hate mainstream music because it's too mainstream. I don't like liking what other people like. Well, then again, you're conforming yourself to a different set of principles. It's best to conform yourself to your own principles. And then what you might find is that your principles probably aren't very much in line with most people. We might have, we might dress differently, we might express ourselves differently, but most of us believe most of the same things. So, it begs this question about what conformity is. The way he's using the word here, it's a very technical sense. Conformity in this sense here means to do what other people want you to do. It means doing what other people want you to do. And wanting to do what other people want you to do. So in other words, it's like, it isn't just, hey, stop behaving this way, then you stop behaving that way, and you conform and you fold your arms. Conformity is more of like, hey, you're expected to do this, so you're like, okay, I want to make you happy, so I'll do what you want me to do. That's what he's talking about here. So conformity is wanting to do what other people want you to do, and then you're doing it. So it follows under this mask of, well, no, I want to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. But do you really want to do it? Or are you just doing it to get along? And by the way, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it if you're doing it just to get along. Because most people do that, because And what are you going to do? You're going to live your whole life in violent rebellion against the society in which you live? And there are people like this, by the way. And these are narcissists, largely, because they're trying to get the rest of society to conform to them. Because they're either unwilling to participate in society, or they think they're incapable of doing it, which is largely what it is. This is why it's usually very low-status people who try to use things like cancel culture to destroy people, because they really can't do it on their own. So they're trying to get the rest of society to conform to them, rather than getting with a program. And you might say, well, shouldn't they just be allowed to be who they are? Sure, sure. But the problem isn't being who you are. It's when we try to force other people to be that way. And that's the difference between conformity and totalitarianism. To be a totalitarian, or to be a tyrant, is to force someone to conform. To force someone to do what you want them to do. So conformity is when you do it willingly. Totalitarianism is when you're forced to go along with it. You must do this, you must do that. You have to say this, you have to speak this way, you have to believe these things. Even if you don't believe it, you still have to express these ideas. And then we all kind of nod along and go, okay. Do we feel like, well, I don't want to have to fight against it because that gets messy. So the courage to break out of a settled mold is difficult because we find conformity to be comfortable. It's not just to do what people want us to do, but to actually start to believe that we want to do what other people want us to do. And this is why the opposite of courage is not cowardice, it's conformity. So I guess the question goes, why do we feel the need to conform and to fit into a group? Why do we want to fit into the group? Well, because of safety. Obviously, safety. There's safety in numbers. This is why we want to be liked. This is why we want to be popular. Because the more of us that there are, the less vulnerable I am, because I'm part of a larger group. To stand on your own means to be vulnerable. If it's me against one person, that person's attacking me, I can probably withstand the attack of one person. I can't probably withstand the attack of 5 people nearly as well, or 100 people, or 1,000 people. At some point you become overwhelmed. And if you're in the group that's overwhelming, you start to feel very powerful. Not for yourself, but because of the group to which you belong. And so it's comfortable for us to do that, because then we don't have to face our own vulnerability. And so what is it to be vulnerable? To be vulnerable means to be aware of your own mortality. That's what it ultimately amounts to. It isn't just that we want to conform because we're afraid of being attacked. It's because failing an attack reminds us that we're vulnerable. And our ultimate vulnerability is the fact that we're going to die. So in a very deep existential sense, in your unconscious, that's the thing that we're really facing. It's having to face the fact that we're vulnerable and that we're mortal. And if you're vulnerable, well, what's the point in fighting? You can lose, and you can lose everything. But I guess that is the point in fighting, maybe. Because then you're vulnerable, but you're facing it willingly. You know? And there's deep courage in that. Courage is not coward. The opposite of courage isn't to be afraid. The opposite of courage is to conform. Because when you conform, it means that you're not willing to face the very scary, frightening truth of your own vulnerability. And again, it's difficult. It doesn't do us any good when we walk around and just tell people, oh, you're just afraid, you're just a coward. Of course, most people are cowards, but brave people are cowards who go forward anyway. We're afraid, of course. There's a lot to be afraid of. There's a lot of stuff that's in our control to be afraid of. There's a lot of stuff that's out of our control to be afraid of. But the question becomes, do we go forward anyway? Do we willingly take on the tragedies of life? Because life is tragic, no matter how great and wonderful it is. And by the way, life is great. Life is wonderful. Life is spectacular and special. And the depth to which you understand that will reflect the depth to which you live. I promise you that. As soon as you recognize how incredibly precious your life is, now you're able to accept a wonderful life. Because everything can become like a child sees it, brand new and special for the first time. That only happens if you're willing to accept it that way. But then you also have to accept the tragedy of life, which is that no matter how long it is, it's over too short. So you're going to die. What do you do with that? Well, you overcome that by recognizing the precious gift that life is. There's another tragedy of life, which is suffering. Tell me if you've heard this before. Life is suffering. You don't get to choose not to suffer, but you can redeem yourself and that you can choose what you're going to suffer for. And there's something beautiful in that once you recognize it. Because then the things that you suffer for are the things that you love. And this is how we express love. I mean, there's no greater love that a person has except that they would give their life for their friend, that they would suffer for their friends. And to do it willingly, not as a victim, but to do it willingly. Even if you are being victimized, to do it willingly. And of course, the last tragedy of life is guilt. We feel terrible for the things that we've done. We feel terrible for the things that we haven't done. And by the way, you should. You should. You should. But you shouldn't feel so guilty that it stops you from doing the right thing in the future. In fact, you should use the guilt to propel you into doing the right thing in the future. I did this one terrible thing one time. Now, you could take the path of saying, I'm just a lonely piece of shit, and so therefore I don't deserve happiness, and then you treat yourself that way, and then you allow yourself to be treated that way, and that leads you down a very dark hole in your life. Or you can look at it and say, I feel guilty for having done this thing. I want to never do that again. So I'm going to use that to stop me from behaving badly in the future. And of course, then you have the narcissist who say, I don't feel guilty, I don't regret anything. You're just not thinking. Or you're not a human. You know, I think I would put my money on the first one. So those are the three tragedies of life: death, suffering, and guilt. And once you can come to grips with that, then you can address all of them. And then there's no need for conformity. At that point, it's just
Living.
goddamn right, it's living.
It's like,
And you had your hand up.
Oh no, I was gonna say something you already said.
Yeah, then it must have been smart. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Friday.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh. Wow, that's a lot to take in. Anyways, for